Rain trembled against the high windows of Beaumont Hall, streaking the glass like tears unconfessed. Inside, the chandeliers blazed in defiance of the storm, their thousand crystals scattering light over silk and satin, laughter and champagne. The autumn ball had begun. The air shimmered with perfume and gossip, with the rustle of skirts and the unspoken warfare of glances. And in the midst of it all stood Miss Eleanor Harcourt, neither ornament nor participant, but a polite, nearly invisible presence at the edge of her family's glory. At 29, she had long passed the age when a woman was expected to catch a husband, much less hope for romance. Once years ago she had been called handsome, but time and disappointment had softened her beauty into something quieter, dignified, if overlooked. Her nieces, bright and vain in equal measure, whispered that she ought to be grateful for her place among them. A chaperone, a keeper of shawls, an observer of younger fortunes. She endured their teasing with the same grace, she offered every slight. Yet this evening, even her composure trembled. Her lavender gown, a faded relic from a gentler year, seemed almost ghostly beside the jewel tones swirling through the ballroom. As couples swept past in waltz, she stood alone near a marble pillar, pretending to study the orchestra. The music was exquisite, violins sighing like hearts half broken, but its beauty struck her as cruel. Then a voice cut through the din. "Miss Harcourt." She turned, startled, to find Mr. Linton, a mild young barrister and one of the few men who ever bothered to greet her. He bowed with awkward courtesy. Might you honor me with this dance?" Her heart fluttered. She had not danced in years. "You are very kind, Mr. Linton." As he led her to the floor, she felt the prickle of attention. A few ladies paused their conversations. A ripple of laughter trailed behind. But for the span of the opening measures, Eleanor let herself forget them. She followed the rhythm as best she could, her steps careful, her breath shallow with something dangerously close to joy. For once she was seen. Then, quite suddenly, Mr. Linton's gaze shifted over her shoulder, and his expression changed. She followed his eyes and saw her niece Clara, radiant in white silk and pearls, smiling like a debutante in a painting. The next moment, the music surged, and Mr. Linton released Eleanor's hand mid-turn, murmuring an apology she barely heard before crossing the floor toward Clara. The laughter that followed was not cruel in sound, but in meaning. It was the genteel kind that society permitted itself when pity dressed as amusement. Eleanor froze. Her hands hung useless at her sides. The room spun softly around her. The orchestra played on, indifferent. The violins wept for her in secret, or so she imagined, while she made her slow retreat to the edge of the floor. She tried to smile, to compose herself. A trifling mistake, she whispered under her breath. He meant no harm. But her reflection in the mirrored wall betrayed her. A woman left standing alone, her face pale, her dignity clinging by a thread. Her sister's voice, Mrs. Beaumont's, rose behind her, sharp with forced cheer. "Dearest Eleanor, perhaps you will take some refreshment? You look quite flushed." "I am perfectly well," Eleanor murmured, though her throat ached. "You always say so." A knowing smile. "Still, it might be better if you sit. The gentlemen are occupied." The implication stung more than the words. Eleanor inclined her head and slipped away, through the terrace doors and into the chill. Rain whispered against the marble balustrade, cool and cleansing. She drew a breath that almost steadied her. The music inside dulled to a muffled hum. From here, the world seemed distant, as if she had stepped outside the boundaries of her own life. Poor Aunt Eleanor. A voice drifted from within, too close to be imagined. "It's rather tragic, isn't it? Always left behind." Her niece again. Clara, sweet and merciless. Laughter followed. Eleanor closed her eyes. For a moment, she considered fleeing altogether, returning to Harcourt Manor, to solitude, to silence. Yet something stubborn within her refused. Let them whisper. Let them gloat. She had endured worse humiliations, broken engagements, cold winters without invitation, and the daily ache of being forgotten by the very world she once dreamed to charm. Tonight would not break her. And then another voice, unfamiliar, low and steady. "You bear cruelty with remarkable poise, Miss Harcourt." She turned sharply. A tall figure stood at the edge of the terrace, half-shadowed by rain and lamplight. His coat was dark, his hair darker still, his eyes reflective as wet stone. She recognized him instantly. Adrian Sinclair, Duke of Wessex, the most sought-after bachelor in London. She had seen him only from afar, a man whose name adorned gossip columns and whose fortune could command any heart he desired. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace," she managed, startled. "I did not realize anyone was spying." His mouth curved faintly. "Forgive me. I came for air, not amusement." The thunder rolled behind him, echoing the distant orchestra. He studied her, and for once she did not feel inspected, but understood. His gaze held no condescension, only a curious gravity. "You should not stand in the rain," he said softly. "They will talk more than they already do." Her composure wavered. "They will talk regardless. It seems to be their pastime." Something flickered across his face, approval, perhaps even admiration. "Then you are braver than they deserve." Eleanor could not meet his eyes. The words struck too near her loneliness, too near the wound she worked so hard to hide. "You are kind to say so, Your Grace, but courage and circumstance rarely walk hand in hand." He inclined his head. "And yet they sometimes do, when one refuses to bow." The rain eased. Candlelight from a ballroom caught his profile, sharp and beautiful. For an absurd instant, she imagined what her nieces would say if they saw her standing here with him. The thought almost made her laugh. "I think," she said quietly, "the world would rather I did bow. It suits their story of me." "Then change the story," he replied, his tone as even as the rain. Before she could respond, the terrace doors opened again. Her sister appeared, her smile brittle as lace. "Ah, Your Grace! What an honor! I see my sister has kept you company." Eleanor stepped back, heart quickening. "We were merely speaking." "Of course," Mrs. Beaumont said, her eyes sharp. "Come, Eleanor. You mustn't detain his grace." The Duke's voice was calm but firm. "It was I who detained her." He offered the briefest bow to Eleanor before turning toward the door. "Good evening, Miss Harcourt." When he was gone, her sister's composure collapsed into irritation. "Do you realize what people will assume? You alone with him on the terrace. Honestly, Eleanor, have you no sense of appearances?" Eleanor drew herself upright, trembling but proud. "If appearances are all that matter, then I shall remain a disappointment." Her sister's gasp was sharp enough to cut the air. Inside, the orchestra shifted to a new melody, something bright and heedless. Eleanor turned back to the rain. Her humiliation lingered, but beneath it pulsed something new. Not hope exactly, but a strange defiance, a whisper of warmth against the cold. For the first time in years, someone had seen her, not as an ornament past its shine, but as a woman of worth. And though she told herself it meant nothing, her pulse betrayed her, steady no longer, but quick as thunder's echo in her chest. Morning sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, tracing pale gold patterns over the worn mahogany of Harcourt Manor's breakfast room. The rain that had ruined the Beaumont ball had passed, but its memory lingered, in Eleanor's thoughts, in the whispers that clung to her family like cobwebs. A week had passed since the Duke of Wessex had spoken to her upon the terrace, and still her heart betrayed her whenever she recalled the quiet strength in his gaze. She had convinced herself it had been a moment born of pity, no more. Yet even pity, when wrapped in gentleness, could echo longer than affection once believed lost. Her tea had cooled untouched when the housemaid entered with a small box, unmarked save for a sprig of white silk ribbon. "This arrived for you, miss," she murmured, setting it down with curiosity barely concealed. Eleanor frowned. She received few letters and fewer gifts. With a small breath, she untied the ribbon. Inside lay a single white camellia, fresh, immaculate, fragrant as a promise. Beneath it, a folded card bearing no signature, only a brief inscription in a bold, slanted hand, "For the grace that defies cruelty." Her heart stumbled. The scent of the blossom was faint yet intoxicating, its petals soft as memory. She read the words again, her pulse quickening against her will. No one had ever written to her so. No one had ever thought her graceful, not her family, not the men who had overlooked her, not even herself. For a fleeting moment, she imagined the Duke's voice shaping those words, low and certain. Then she caught her reflection in a glass cabinet, the same modest gown, the same quiet composure, and laughed softly, chastising her foolishness. "No," she whispered, closing the box. "Men like him do not send tokens to women like me." By afternoon, however, the household had begun to hum with rumor. Clara, her niece, burst into the drawing-room where Eleanor sat stitching by the fire. "Aunt, have you heard?" she said, eyes bright with mischief. "They say the Duke of Wessex is to pay a call upon the Beaumonts again next week. Perhaps someone has captured his attention." Eleanor looked up, her needle suspended mid-air. "And who might that someone be?" Clara's smile deepened. "Why, who else? He scarcely danced all evening, and yet he lingered where I was most of the night. Mamma says his eyes followed me more than once. He must have found me agreeable." "Or polite," Eleanor said quietly. Her niece tilted her head, amused. "Politeness is only the beginning, Aunt. Charm must finish what civility starts." Eleanor bent again to her embroidery, though her stitches trembled. It was foolish to feel the pang she did. Clara was young, beautiful, everything society celebrated. And yet the echo of that night, of the Duke's voice calling her brave, had stirred something she could not easily bury. The following day brought fresh cruelty. At a small tea gathering hosted by Lady Fairfax, Eleanor accompanied her sister and nieces, content to fade among the floral wallpaper and chatter. But no corner was safe from malice dressed in laughter. "I declare," said one lady with a painted smile, "the season is positively brimming with hopeful brides. Though some are rather late to the race, are they not, Mrs. Beaumont?" Her sister simpered. "You refer to my dear Eleanor?" "Oh, she has long since retired from the field." A ripple of amusement spread through the room. Eleanor lowered her eyes, gripping her teacup too tightly. "Retired, you say?" Another voice chimed. "How noble! Not all women know when to surrender." The porcelain nearly slipped from her fingers. She inhaled, slow and steady, and lifted her gaze. "Better to surrender with grace," she said softly, "than to chase admiration without substance." A hush fell, brief, brittle, before laughter resumed in another corner. But the tremor in her cup had not gone unnoticed. From the doorway came a sudden quiet, and when Eleanor turned, she saw him. The Duke of Wessex stood just within the threshold, rain-dark coat still gleaming from his ride, eyes unreadable. He inclined his head in greeting, but his gaze lingered on her, not the women who now fluttered in confusion at his arrival. "Your Grace," Lady Fairfax gasped, "what a surprise!" "My apologies for the intrusion," he said smoothly. "I came seeking Mrs. Beaumont. There are matters of the orphanage fund to discuss. But first, if I may, Miss Harcourt." Eleanor rose before she realized it, her voice a whisper. "Yes, Your Grace." "I am to host a meeting regarding the new hospital charity," he said, his tone formal yet warm. "I am told you have experience with such endeavors. Might I ask your counsel?" The room seemed to tilt. Whispers flitted like moths. No man, let alone a duke, had ever solicited her advice in such company. She curtsied. "If I can be of use, it would be my honor." His gaze softened. "I have no doubt of that." When he departed moments later, the air thickened with speculation. Mrs. Beaumont's fan snapped open with trembling fingers. "What could he possibly want with you?" she hissed when the guests dispersed. "Do you not see what you invite? People will talk." "They already do," Eleanor murmured, though her heart thundered in her chest. That evening, as twilight bled across the moors, she returned to her room to find another box upon her writing desk, smaller than before, but tied with the same ribbon. Inside, a crimson camellia glowed against dark velvet. Beneath it a single line, "For the courage you showed when the world turned cruel." The handwriting was identical. She pressed the card to her chest, her mind a storm of disbelief and forbidden wonder. If it was from the Duke, it was reckless. If it was not, it was dangerous, a jest designed to ruin. Sleep eluded her. In the mirror, the crimson blossom seemed to pulse with secret life, as though it carried the rhythm of her own heart. Days passed. The story of the Duke's fondness for Miss Harcourt spread faster than wind across fields. Servants whispered, acquaintances smirked. Clara's laughter grew brittle. At dinner one night, her brother spoke with unease. "Eleanor, perhaps it would be wise to temper your correspondence. Appearances, you understand." "I have written to no one," she said simply. Her brother's wife exchanged a glance with Clara. "Then someone writes to you, and that, my dear, is quite enough." Eleanor rose from the table. If letters can undo a woman's reputation so easily, then perhaps reputations are not worth keeping. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain again. She stood at her window, looking toward the distant lights of Wessex Hall. Somewhere beyond those hills, a man of impossible consequence might be thinking of her, or not at all. She could not know, which frightened her more. The camellia on her sill had begun to wilt, its petals bruised to the color of fading blood. Yet still she could not bring herself to throw it away. When the clock struck midnight, a carriage was heard upon the distant road, swift, unannounced. A faint knock echoed below. The housemaid's voice, breathless, called up the stairs. "Miss Harcourt, there's a letter for you." Brought by the Duke's own man. Eleanor's hands shook as she reached for the envelope, sealed in dark wax. Her pulse roared in her ears. She hesitated only a moment before breaking the seal. Inside, upon heavy cream paper, was written a single line in that same bold, slanted hand. "Tomorrow at noon. The library at Wessex Hall." The carriage wheels whispered along the frost-slick road, carrying Eleanor through the pale hush of morning. Mist curled around the hedgerows, silvered by the weak sun, and her heart thudded with a rhythm she could neither calm nor comprehend. The letter she had received still lay folded in her reticule, its words burned into memory. Tomorrow at noon. The library at Wessex Hall. No explanation. No signature. And yet she knew, without need of confirmation, whose hand had written it. When the carriage drew up to the great estate, its facade loomed like a cathedral of stone and memory. Wessex Hall, seat of the Duke's lineage, stood severe against the sky, its ivy walls glistening from the morning's thaw. Eleanor stepped down, her breath forming small clouds in the air. The butler greeted her with grave courtesy and led her through corridors lined with portraits, faces of power and privilege watching her, as if she were an intruder in their world. At the library doors, her escort paused. "His Grace awaits within." Eleanor hesitated. The scent of wood smoke drifted through the carved panels, mingled with that of old paper and rain-damp wool. Her pulse fluttered like a trapped bird. She lifted the latch. Inside, the fire crackled in a vast hearth, casting gold upon shelves that reached the ceiling. The Duke stood beside the window, gloved hands clasped behind him, his profile drawn in light and shadow. He turned as she entered. "Miss Harcourt." "Your Grace." She curtsied, voice steadier than she felt. "Your note was unexpected." "I feared as much," he said quietly. "But I hoped you might indulge my presumption." He motioned toward the fire. "You are cold. Sit, if you please." She obeyed, smoothing her gloves, aware of his gaze, a gaze that never sought to diminish, but to see. He removed his gloves, revealing long, elegant hands, and leaned upon the mantel. "You receive the camellias." Her breath caught. "Then they were from you." A flicker of a smile. "Who else would dare?" "Many would jest," she murmured. "Few would mean it." "I meant every word." The quiet between them deepened, filled by the faint hiss of the fire. Eleanor felt the ground shift beneath the safety of propriety. "Why?" she asked at last. "Why send them to me?" "Because you endured what most could not," he said. "That night, when the world mocked your solitude, you carried yourself as though their cruelty were beneath notice. It moved me." "You mistake composure for strength," she said softly. "I am not brave, only practiced." "Practiced in pain, then?" he replied. "A discipline I know too well." She looked up startled. "You, your Grace? You have the world's admiration. He gave a short laugh. Admiration is a hollow thing. It echoes, but it does not answer. Do you know what it is to stand among hundreds and be utterly unseen? Yes, she whispered. Their eyes met, and in that instant the air between them seemed charged with confession. She had not meant to speak again, but the warmth of his tone, the unguarded honesty in it, broke something within her. When I was 19, she began, I was engaged to a gentleman of good family. I believe myself loved. My father had no fortune, but he promised our union would be one of affection, not advantage. 2 months before the wedding, my betrothed married another, an heiress. I was told I should be grateful for the narrow escape, that poverty had spared me greater humiliation. But humiliation was all I knew. Since then, I have lived as a warning, not a woman. The Duke's expression darkened. The man was a fool. He was practical, she said with a rueful smile, and I was naive. I thought virtue might command loyalty. Virtue commands nothing in this age, he said bitterly. It is currency that rules, dowries, titles, appearances. And yet, she said, studying him, you stand above all that. A duke may afford his conscience. Do not be deceived, he said, turning away. I am as bound as any man. Every title is a chain disguised as honor. My mother reminds me daily that duty must outweigh inclination. I have declined 3 proposals of alliance this year alone, each more strategic than the last. And she disapproves. She despairs, he said with a faint smile. She believes I squander my inheritance by refusing affection where fortune is required. Eleanor's voice softened. Then why invite me here, to your library, alone? The world will call it indiscreet. Let it, he murmured. I have grown weary of its noise. The words trembled between them like a secret unsealed. He stepped closer, the firelight touching his face, illuminating the shadow of fatigue beneath his composure. You are not like them, he said. You do not adorn yourself in falseness. When you look at me, I feel, he stopped himself, searching for words, as though the pretense falls away. Her hands tightened around her gloves. Your Grace, please, such words. Are they unwelcome? They are dangerous. His gaze did not waver. So is truth. Silence held them. The rain began again, tapping against the tall windows like the pulse of time itself. Eleanor rose, her heart aching with contradictions. You cannot mean to involve yourself in scandal on my account. He stepped forward, voice low. And if I already have, then I must beg you to reconsider. Would you rather I pretend indifference? She closed her eyes. I would rather you remain unharmed by kindness misinterpreted. He moved nearer still, until she could feel the warmth radiating from him, the faint scent of cedar and rain. Do you think me so feeble, Miss Harcourt, that a whisper could undo me? It undid me once, she said, her voice breaking. You cannot imagine the cruelty of their laughter when the world believes you unwanted. I can, he said quietly, for though they covet my name, none have ever wanted me. Her breath caught at the rawness in his tone. Something fragile and dangerous unfolded in her chest, a recognition too deep to disguise. Adrian, she whispered before she could stop herself. He drew a sharp breath, her use of his name both shock and solace. Eleanor, he answered, his voice almost reverent. They stood suspended in that fragile moment, the world narrowing to firelight and breath. He reached out, hesitated, then let his hand hover inches above hers. Tell me to stop, he said. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The storm outside rose in sudden fury, wind thrashing the glass as if warning them. He drew back, his restraint trembling. I will not dishonor you, he said hoarsely, but I cannot pretend what I feel is mere admiration. She turned away, tears bright on her lashes. Then we are both undone. He exhaled, long and unsteady. If ruin is the cost of honesty, I will pay it. Eleanor faced him then, every defense stripped bare. And if honesty destroys us both? His answer was a whisper. Then let it. A knock shattered the stillness. The butler's voice, urgent, cut through the air. Your Grace, the Duchess Dowager has arrived unexpectedly. Eleanor froze. The Duke's expression darkened with dread. "Your mother," she breathed. He looked toward the door, then back at her. "She must not see you here." Too late. The hinges creaked, footsteps echoed in the hall. The Duchess's voice, cold and commanding, drew near. Eleanor's pulse pounded in her ears. The Duke's hand brushed hers, fleeting, forbidden. "Go," he whispered, "before she destroys what neither of us yet understands." And as Eleanor slipped through the servants' passage, her heart shattering with equal parts terror and hope, the echo of his words followed her through the shadows. Let it. Under the glittering chandeliers of the Stanhope Winter Ball, time seemed suspended, the scent of lilies and candle wax heavy in the air. Every eye was turned toward the gilded staircase, where Lady Genevieve stood poised, her gloved fingers trembling upon the rail. The Duke of Ravensshire had just entered, tall, composed, his expression unreadable. A hush fell, the orchestra faltering for a breath. And in that fragile pause, the world shifted. She had told herself not to hope. For weeks, Genevieve had avoided his gaze, withdrawn from conversation, and silenced her heart with logic. A duke's admiration was one thing, a duke's proposal another. Yet the murmur in the air was undeniable, rumors of an impending betrothal. And, cruelly, the whispers did not name her. Instead, they murmured of her niece. Marianne, the youngest, the most admired, with her silver laughter and eyes like the spring sky. She stood now at the foot of the staircase, radiant in white silk, accepting compliments that fluttered around her like moths. Genevieve felt the sting of her own invisibility, that peculiar humiliation known only to women past youth, too aware of what time had stolen. "Lady Genevieve," murmured Lord Halworth at her side, "you appear unwell." She managed a brittle smile. "Merely warm, my lord. It is quite crowded tonight." "Indeed," he said, his eyes sliding toward the Duke. "And yet, I sense the air grows colder." Genevieve followed his gaze and caught sight of Ravensshire bending toward Marianne. His voice low, his expression softened. The sight pierced her with silent agony. She turned away before her composure fractured entirely, though the motion was enough to catch a flicker of movement. The Duke's eyes rising, finding hers across the crowd. It was only a moment, a heartbeat, a glance, but it unsettled everything. Later, amidst the swirl of waltzes, Genevieve sought refuge upon the terrace. Frost glittered on the balustrade, and the night stretched vast and merciless beyond the gardens. She pressed her hands to the stone, steadying herself against the tremor in her chest. She had not meant to fall in love with him. It had been an accident of proximity, evenings shared over chess and literature, quiet laughter at the absurdities of society. He had spoken to her as though she were not invisible, not fated, not forgotten. But now, under the cold moonlight, she felt the folly of it. How her heart had betrayed her with hope. "Lady Genevieve," came a voice behind her, low and unmistakable. She turned. Startled, the night air tightening around her lungs. The Duke stood framed in the doorway, the candlelight from the ballroom gilding his features, his breath visible in the chill. "I did not expect to find you alone," he said, approaching with that measured grace that commanded every space he entered. "Nor I you," she replied, her tone controlled though her pulse betrayed her. "Your company seems much in demand tonight." He paused near her, his expression unreadable. "You mean Miss Marianne?" "I mean the company you choose to keep, your grace," she said softly, refusing to meet his eyes. A long silence stretched between them, filled with the faint sound of violins drifting from the ballroom. Then, quietly, firmly, he said, "You are mistaken." She forced a brittle laugh. "Am I? Society does not think so." "Society," he said, stepping closer, "has never known the truth of anything worth knowing." The words hung between them like a challenge. She met his gaze at last, and what she saw there terrified her more than gossip or rejection ever could. For there was affection, fierce and restrained, the kind that burns through every wall of propriety. Her composure began to crack. "You must not look at me so," she whispered. "It is unkind." "Unkind," he echoed, voice low, "would be allowing you to believe I see anyone else." She drew back a breath. Your Grace. Genevieve, he said, the name breaking the air like confession. You know why I came here tonight. You have known for weeks. The truth trembled on her lips, but shame sealed it. You cannot, she said, her voice shaking. I am nearly 8 years your senior. You must think of your title, your reputation. Do you imagine I have not? He interrupted, stepping closer until the scent of winter roses between them seemed to vanish. Every man of my station marries to please the world. I would rather marry to please my heart. The declaration, though whispered, carried the weight of thunder. Genevieve turned from him, her gloved hand pressed to her mouth as if to contain a cry. She had dreamt of such words, but dreams were mercy, not truth. Inside, the orchestra swelled. Somewhere, Marianne's laughter rippled through the hall light and clear, and suddenly Genevieve saw the ruin that love would bring, to him, to herself, to all. You must not say such things, she said, barely above a breath. You would destroy us both. He reached out, catching her hand before she could retreat. Then, let it destroy me first, he said. I am willing. Her heart broke in that instant, for his courage, for her cowardice, for the cruel perfection of a love that could never bloom beneath the eyes of the world. You speak as though love were freedom, she whispered. It is a cage, my lord, especially for women like me. And yet, he said, you are the only one I have ever wished to keep company with inside it. A tremor of longing surged through her. But then the sound of voices reached the terrace, laughter, approaching footsteps. She wrenched her hand free, eyes wide with panic. Please, she hissed. If they see you here... He hesitated, then bowed low, his expression one of fierce restraint. Very well, but this is not the end. As he vanished into the shadows, the doors burst open. 2 young women stepped into the cold, Marianne among them, her cheeks flushed from dancing. Aunt, she exclaimed, startled. You are here alone? Genevieve forced a smile, her pulse still hammering. Merely taking air. Marian giggled. How dull the ball must seem to you. But I have wondrous news. His Grace has asked that I ride with him tomorrow in Hyde Park. The world tilted. Genevieve managed a soft, has he indeed? Yes. Marianne clasped her hands. Do you not think it means something? Genevieve's throat constricted. Yes, she whispered faintly. The laughter of the young women faded behind her as they returned indoors. Alone once more beneath the frost-touched stars, Genevieve sank against the balustrade, her face turned toward the dark. In the distance, the music played on, but in her chest, something far older and wilder had begun, rebellion of the heart, trembling between love and ruin. And though she did not yet know it, by the following night, all of London would know her name. The morning of Lady Ashcombe's garden fete dawned with cruel perfection, sunlight trembling over dew-swept roses, violins tuning beyond the hedge, and gossip blooming faster than the lilies. Genevieve stood by her window, watching the carriages arrive in a glittering procession. Her maid fastened the final pearl at her throat with trembling fingers. By now, every household from Mayfair to Grosvenor Square whispered her name. The Duke of Ravenshire's attentions, once her quiet secret, had become the capital's loudest amusement. They called her the poor spinster who bewitched him, the aunt who dared rival her own niece. The scandal burned like wildfire through drawing rooms, fed by envy, sharpened by cruelty. And though she bore it with outward calm, each whisper felt like a lash upon the skin. Marian had withdrawn from her entirely, her girlish adoration soured into confusion and wounded pride. You might have told me, she had said last night, eyes shimmering with betrayed youth. You might have spared me the humiliation. Genevieve had no answer then. She had none now. The mirror before her caught the truth, not a rival to Marianne's youth, but a woman carved by restraint, by silence, by long seasons of invisibility. And yet there lingered something unbreakable in her reflection, a quiet, dangerous dignity that the world had mistaken for weakness. When she arrived at the fete, conversation stilled like a wave retreating. Fans fluttered, monocles gleamed, and beneath the canopy of lilacs, the Duke of Ravensshire turned at once toward her. He crossed the lawn without hesitation, cutting through the whispering crowd with a steadiness that made her pulse falter. His coat was black, his expression unreadable, but in his eyes burned something fierce and absolute. "Lady Genevieve," he said, bowing with exquisite precision. Her voice was barely a breath. "Your Grace." The crowd's murmur swelled. She felt every gaze upon her, every unkind hope for spectacle. "You should not speak to me here," she whispered. "They are waiting to devour whatever you do." "Then let them choke," he said quietly. "It is time they were fed the truth." Before she could stop him, he turned toward the gathered company, the matrons, the gentlemen, the daughters clutching parasols like shields. "You have all heard rumor upon rumor," he said, his voice carrying clear across the garden. "Allow me, then, to set them right." Genevieve's breath caught. "No, my lord," she murmured, stepping forward, but he continued as though her plea were wind. "You speak of impropriety," he said, "of scandal and folly. Yet there is only one truth. I have long loved Lady Genevieve Harcourt, and I mean to ask for her hand before you all." A ripple of disbelief coursed through the crowd. Gasps, laughter, murmured outrage. Lady Ashcombe dropped her fan. Marianne's pale face appeared among the spectators, her lips parted in shock. Genevieve's heart thundered painfully. "You cannot," she began, her voice breaking. He took her gloved hand in both of his, heedless of the eyes fixed upon them. "I can," he said, "and I will. You taught me courage, Genevieve, now let me prove I possess it." She felt the world narrowing to his voice, his touch, the raw sincerity in his gaze. And for a fleeting, impossible moment, she saw what life might be, a love unmasked, proud, defiant against the sneers of the world. But reality crashed in like cold water. Marianne's soft sob broke the hush. The Dowager Marchioness turned away in disgust. Laughter, brittle, vicious, rose from somewhere behind them. Genevieve withdrew her hand. "Do not do this," she whispered. "You will destroy yourself." He smiled faintly. "Then let me be ruined in truth, not in rumor." Tears blurred her vision. "And what of me, Ravenshire? They will not forgive a woman's audacity as they forgive a man's." He looked at her, truly looked, and his voice softened. "Then let me stand beside you when they do not." Something inside her gave way, a lifetime of restraint crumbling under the weight of his resolve. She trembled, torn between terror and wonder. The orchestra struck up a tune inside the marquee, absurdly cheerful. All around them, the murmurs deepened. "Please," she said at last, her voice breaking through the air like silk torn by wind, "say no more. Not here." He inclined his head, the faintest smile touching his mouth, half sorrow, half triumph. "As you wish, my lady. But know this, I will not retract what is true." He bowed and departed through the parting crowd, leaving a silence, so deep it seemed to echo. When Genevieve finally looked up, Marian stood before her, trembling. For a long moment neither spoke. Then the girl whispered, "You truly love him." Genevieve's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she reached for Marianne's hand, her eyes shining with all the things she could not justify, not love, not shame, not hope. By dusk, the story had already flown through London. The Duke's declaration, the aunt's tears, the scandal immortalized in ink and gossip. But behind closed doors, within the quiet of her drawing room, Genevieve sat by the fire, her heart strangely still. She had expected ruin to feel like destruction. Instead, it felt like release. The world might never forgive her, but she had at last stopped apologizing for existing unseen. And when the Duke's letter arrived the next morning, sealed in black wax, simple and unadorned, her hands trembled as she broke it open. "I will wait for your courage to match my own." The words were few, but they set her heart alight. She pressed the letter to her lips, her reflection caught once more in the window pane, no longer the poor spinster aunt the world pitied, but a woman who had dared to be loved. Outside, the carriages rumbled and gossip sang, but she did not hear them. For the first time in her life, Genevieve Harcourt allowed herself to smile.